Hello, I'm Larry Goldberg, and I'm here to talk to you about an extraordinary human being and a good friend of mine, Ron Pappalardo. Ron is currently talking to students all over America about the prevention of suicide. For Ron, this is a very personal odyssey. You see, a few years ago, he lost his son, a 17-year-old boy, to suicide on his first day as a senior in high school. Ron didn't give in to grief and depression. In fact, he rallied and started to talk to students all about the subject of suicide. He talked and he listened. Today, Ron is easily the most knowledgeable person on the subject of suicide prevention that I know about. He's written a book on the subject and helped countless people work through their grief and and deal with the subject of suicide. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to spend a few minutes with him to shed more light on this important subject. Good afternoon, Ron.
Good afternoon, Larry.
So why have you decided to work amongst college students in this important job?
Well, when you look at the numbers, you'll find that suicide is the third leading cause of death for young people overall, and that's ages 15 to 44. But when you narrow it to college students in particular, it's worse than that. It's the second leading cause of death among college students today.
I had no idea.
Yeah, either did I until I did the research. But you'll find that each year over 1,000 college students will take their lives to suicide. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, because over 10 times as many will attempt suicide and fail. And even though they fail, over 50% of those students will wind up going to the hospital for their injuries.
These are very disturbing statistics. I hadn't given much thought to what becomes of those who actually survive a suicide attempt. You say there are 10 times as many of those as actual suicide attempts?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Larry. And not only that, sometimes the injuries are just horrific. For example, there was a teenage young man who got a shotgun and pointed it at his head and pulled the trigger. Believe it or not, he survived the shotgun blast. But in the process, he blew off his entire face, lost the sight of both of his eyes. So he's going to be blind for the rest of his life. I want to tell every young person in America, if you attempt suicide, you've only got a 1 in 10 chance of actually killing yourself, but you've got better than a 50% chance of putting yourself in the hospital with serious injuries, some of which will make you permanently disabled.
But Ron, why do you suppose suicide is such a problem on college campuses?
Well, it's not the fault of colleges at all. It's the nature of the college experience. You know, you think about it. When a student goes to college, most of them it's the first time they've ever lived away from home. So they're away from the support of their families, their close friends, and then they're living in a completely different type of living arrangement than they've ever known before. Then you add to that the stress of having to keep their grades up and whatever other activities they're involved in the college, and it can be quite a pressure cooker. And pressure leads to stress, and stress is the #1 trigger for suicidal thinking and behavior.
So that makes a lot of sense. So what can be done about this problem?
Well, I think a lot can be done about it. And first of all, to me, the key is the students, the student body. We simply have to get to the students and provide them with the tools, with the information they need to, first of all, recognize the warning signs of suicide, and then secondly, know what action to take that would be appropriate.
But Ron, you don't actually expect students to prevent suicide, do you?
Well, yeah, I believe very much in the students, and I know what you're saying. Usually we think that mental health professionals should be the ones dealing with suicide, and of course that's true, but Larry, think about it. How many college students have a mental health professional for a roommate? Yeah. Not very many. So the reality is most likely, it's going to be the roommate that's going to notice the behavior. Now, in my own personal experience, when my son attempted suicide, we had a lot of professionals that, they were literally in minutes they were out at the house. We had what we call the first responders. We had the EMS, with the ambulance, and we had the police came out. We even had a detective that came out, because they wanted to see if any foul play was involved. And they were all there, and they were all great professionals. But you know what, Larry? They were all too late. They couldn't help save my son, because he had already sustained injuries so serious that he wound up dying just a few hours later in the hospital.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, thank you, Larry. So what we need is not more first responders. Actually, we need what I call first preventers. And in my view, the students are really, in the circumstances, they're the most qualified to play that role.
So why do you say they're the most qualified to play the role?
Well, it's very simple. Students usually live with other students. So, like I said, if a student is exhibiting suicidal thinking or suicidal behavior, who's going to notice it? It's going to be his roommate or another dorm mate or the RA or the RD. You know, someone in the student community is going to see those behaviors. But the question is, are they going to recognize the behaviors? Are they going to know that these are warning signs of suicide? Not unless we show them, not unless we give them the tools to identify those warning signs and then how to take action.
Yes,
right, look, I'm not expecting the students to be amateur psychiatrists. No, not at all. And I'm not talking about thousands of panicky students running around calling 911 every time some guy breaks up with his girlfriend or some girl breaks up with a boyfriend or whatever. No, you know, there are only really three what I would call red flag warning signs of suicide. You know, those are the ones that are so serious, emergency action is required, you know, at the moment. But there are 8 or 9 other signs that are not as serious. And in that case, believe it or not, probably the most effective suicide prevention is conversation. It's actually just sitting down with that student and allowing the student to open up and share, you know, what it is that's troubling them, pour out the pain that they're experiencing. And to do that, the most likely person is another student, you know, a good friend that's willing to take the time to listen. And, you know, at a minimum, we're probably going to at least buy some time so that that student can get some professional help. So anyway, I just want to provide students with the tools that they need to recognize the warning signs of suicide and then take appropriate action. You know, when I started doing this work, Larry, I was a little afraid to talk to young people and I focused mostly on parents because I thought that, you know, God forbid I might encourage somebody to commit suicide by talking about it. But you know what? I've never had a person who read my book or who heard me speak go out and attempt suicide, at least not that I know of. It's not talking about suicide that causes suicide. It's actually the failure to talk about suicide that can be fatal. It can lead to a suicide taking place.
You're pretty persuasive, Ron, and I can see you're very passionate about this, aren't you?
Well, I hope I am.
Well, so let me ask you one more question. So if I'm from a college or university and you sold me on the need for suicide prevention, what do you want me to do?
Well, just give me 1 hour with your students. That's all I ask.
So how does that work?
Well, most colleges have an orientation week at the beginning of the school year. They've got student activities events all year round, lecture series, all types of events where I could be brought in as a speaker to address the students. And I also want to mention that I'm available, if my schedule permits, on very short notice to come out to your college if you have a suicide take place, because your college needs to know how to avoid what is called copycat suicides, and also how to heal, you know, from the hurt, the trauma that affects, in effect, the entire college community.
So how would a college go about booking a speaking engagement?
Just go to my website, ronpappalardo.com, and you'll see a button there called Contact Ron, and you click on that, give us your information, and we'll get back to you just as soon as possible.
Well, this has been an enlightening talk, and I want to encourage you to continue doing this work, Ron. I really like that term you used, first preventers.
Oh, thank you, Larry.
And I hope everybody's been enlightened by this talk, by this conversation. I know it's a very difficult subject to talk about, but it's very important that we do talk about it. I'm Larry Goldberg.